The earlier Mitsubishi T-2 trainer was the first supersonic jet developed in post-war Japan, and it had only simplistic combat capabilities since it was primarily intended to serve in the trainer role. The F-1 used the F-2 as a base, but it was built from the start as a dedicated combat aircraft. Plans to convert the T-2 design into a single-seat fighter were actually being considered from a fairly early stage, but the funding just wasn't there. As luck would have it, a few other aviation projects fell through, which freed up some money, and the F-1 project was given the green light in 1973. Frankly, it was also kind of a jobs program, as planners recognized that at the time there weren't any other major high-tech aviation programs that were actually going to be in production anywhere in Japan. Compared to the T-2, the F-1 is upgraded in almost every way, and it provides significantly expanded combat capabilities over its predecessor. The F-1 carries a Japanese version of the AWG-12 radar set, which is a slight upgrade over the T-2, and it also has additional weapon pylons, compatibility with a wider range of ordnance, and the rear cockpit seat has been replaced by avionics equipment. Since the F-1 was primarily intended as a strike fighter to attack ground and naval targets, its weapon system included significant upgrades in that direction, including the ability to carry several different types of anti-ship missiles and a few varieties of guided bombs, although none of those weapons are reflected in War Thunder. Yet. The F-1 first flew in 1975 and entered regular service in 1978. It proved fairly popular with ground crews and pilots, although it did receive some fair criticism of potentially not competing very well against some of its potential foreign competitors in different air combat scenarios. Although less than 100 of them were built, it provided the Japanese aviation industry with important experience and contributed greatly to the development and production of the F-2, which replaced it. The last F-1 was retired in 2006, which was a pretty respectable service life spanning over 4 decades. What we get in War Thunder is the F-1, a jet fighter in rank 6 of the Japanese tech tree at battle rating 10.0. This jet gets a ballistics computer with a CCIP and CCRP for its bombs, but nothing for the rocket pods. It doesn't carry any countermeasures, but it does get a radar warning receiver that'll track E, G, and I-band signals. It's still a fairly entry-level unit, but at this BR, it'll be very helpful. Its radar is the JAWG-12. This radar set has regular lookup search and pulse Doppler velocity head-on modes. Plus, it's got ACM boresight functionality, which all combines to make this radar set a really good unit for this BR bracket. It's also worth mentioning that this jet carries a version of the M61 Vulcan cannon with 750 rounds of ammo. This is a very strong gun setup for BR 10.0. For loadouts, you get a few options for missiles and air-to-ground weapons, reflecting fairly good multi-role potential. My personal preference for ground attack options is usually just going to be the bombs over the rocket pods, really just because of the ballistics computer. The missiles you get are the AIM-9E and AIM-9P, 2 versions of the Sidewinder missile. Both of these are rear aspect infrared weapons with uncaged seekers, but the 9E's performance is still pretty limited. The 9P will be a huge upgrade, with better pull and slaving to your radar set. The 9P remains competitive in this BR bracket, and it'll deliver most of your kills once you unlock it for this jet. In terms of its flight performance, the F-1 flies very similar to the T-2 before it in the tech tree, which shouldn't really surprise you since it's based on the T-2. However, it is very slightly heavier with the same engines, so on paper the performance is a marginal downgrade, but out in practice you probably won't notice the difference. With that said, the F-1, like the T-2, can be a very high-performance jet under specific circumstances. The first thing to say is that speed is life, and if you slip down below 600 kilometers an hour, you're going to notice everything about this jet's performance drop off. The turn rate, the acceleration, energy retention, everything goes to crap if you lose too much airspeed, and hopefully it's fairly obvious in the footage how the performance changes from the start to the end of some of the engagements I was in, based on losing airspeed twisting around during the fights. Now the good news is that the F-1 is still very effective if you can keep it fast. In most situations, your ideal speed range for air combat is going to be between about 750 and 950 kilometers an hour. As long as you keep the speed up, you actually benefit slightly from its subpar AOA performance, since the energy retention is significantly better higher in the power curve, and you can be more deliberate with your positioning tactics. Also, like the T2, this jet does fairly well at higher altitudes, which, again, lets you dominate positioning with a bit of practice. The rate of climb is decent in a high-speed zoom climb, but just remember that the jet is still kinda heavy relative to its thrust, so try to avoid vertical loops or vertical scissors. The high yo-yo is still a good maneuver for this jet, but just try not to pitch up any longer than necessary. Try to practice using the horizontal rather than the vertical in order to control your pursuit angle. Oh, it's also worth mentioning that the engines on this thing are still pretty thirsty, and it chugs fuel like a dehydrated hippo. Keep an eye on the fuel gauge and don't hesitate to run home if you get low. Speaking generally, the F-1 has the performance to disengage from really a lot of fights in this BR bracket if you need to go back and, get some gas. Lastly, the usual caveats do apply about how the performance tanks pretty bad if you fly out strapped up with bombs and stuff. It's not a problem, but if you're trying to do multi-role stuff, just be prepared to ditch the bombs or the rocket pods if you get intercepted before you're done engaging your ground targets. Taking the F-1 out into air battles is, again, gonna feel a lot like the T2 before it in the tech tree. But better. Way better. The addition of the 2 extra sidewinders and the ballistics computer gives this plane a dramatically higher scoring potential per sortie, and regardless of your playstyle, the F-1 can deliver really good matches after you've got most of the upgrades unlocked. Plus, the skill set and learning curve coming from the T2 is like a direct copy, so it's not going to take you too long to get used to this plane. In air combat, the ACM mode on the radar, along with the AIM-9Ps, can be a really strong combination. Some of your opponents still won't have flares, and some won't have radar warning receivers, so if you're careful with the positioning tactics, you can do some really effective vulture stuff with this jet. This won't be the best turn-and-burn dogfighter, as a lot of its opposition has better AOA performance and medium-speed energy retention, but if you fly a little less aggressively and focus on positional advantage rather than individual air combat maneuvers, you can frustrate your opponents and rack up quite a few kills, as long as you don't get third-partied yourself. The lack of flares is a disadvantage, so like with the T2, you need to be constantly on the lookout for A-10s and stuff throwing missiles up at you from lower altitudes. In terms of ground attack, the ballistics computer actually makes it really easy to grind this jet's upgrades, and if you do bombing and rocket runs on bases and AI ground units, you'll spade this thing in no time. At least, compared to other jets at this BR. The grind does still suck. Unlike the T2, the bombs will be better than the rockets for close air support since you'll get the CCIP for the bombs, while the rocket pods are still firing blind with that stupid tree sight. The 3D model for the F-1 is well made, and the couple of paint jobs it gets are decent. The refined front end kinda gives it a weird hunchback look, and the afterburners are still in need of an upgrade, but it's not awful to look at, and I still liked having it up on the screen. Landing the F-1 isn't hard, and it's frankly exactly like the T2. It's got a fairly tall and narrow set of landing gear, so don't try doing S-turns on the runway or anything. It's got a good air brake and a drag chute, so the landing runs shouldn't be too long, presuming you don't try and land at super high speeds. You can put the gear and the flaps out at about 450 kilometers an hour. The cockpit on this jet seems decent at a quick glance, but I found the canopy bracing to get in the way more than I expected. The rearward visibility is also pretty bad, but past that, no other complaints. To close out on the Mitsubishi F-1. This jet has a good weapon load for its BR, it gets effective air-to-air missiles, it has good sensors for this BR, its internal cannon is very effective, and it gets a ballistics computer for its bombs. However, its flight performance is heavily dependent on its airspeed, and it doesn't have any countermeasures. The final verdict on the F-1 is that this jet is a really good direct upgrade from the T-2 before it in the tech tree, and it's a capable multi-role fighter for Japan at this battle rating. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, the algorithm thinks you're going to like this one.